In the dark days of the COVID lockdowns, St Anthony, Lachie Moore, Robert and myself sat down to record the 9 in a row Chronicles. They were a fan's perspective and a fan's recollection of a unique time in Celtic's history. For St Anthony and I, the recollections were only just there for the end of the 9 in a row series, but for Robert and Lachie Moore, they were much more prevalent. One of the things the series did do was bring into focus how some football supporters can be very focused on their team, but maybe have lesser memories of other matters. So when, in trying to give the context and wider social history of what was going on at the time, I asked Lachie Moore as we went into the 69-70 season of his memories of the moon landings. He couldn't quite remember what he was doing at that time, but he had a clear and focused memory on what was happening for the rest of that season in the Celtic games. When we recorded the 9 in a row Chronicles, we always knew that there was another series to follow, but at the time we didn't know whether it would be the 9, 10, 11 or more. Of course, it ended up being the second 9 in a row Chronicles that we would be recording, and an incredible time in Celtic's history. And this is the first episode. It is free to all and will be out every Sunday morning thereafter. However, subsequent episodes will be available only to paid subscribers. So if you want to listen to the rest of the 9 in a row Chronicles, then you need to subscribe. You need to log on to thecelticunderground.substack.com and take out a subscription to listen to the 9 in a row Chronicles. And obviously it's fresher in the minds, but it's amazing the things you've forgotten. So this particular series will feature St Anthony, Robert, myself. Unfortunately, Lachie Moore was on his boat when we recorded it, so Andrew Smith gives us the perspective, at times the perspective in the press box, of what was going on with such incredible things such as our nearest rivals going bust and no main competitor in the top leagues. And then, of course, an incredible run that included an invincible season and 4 trebles. As I say, log on to thecelticunderground.substack.com to be able to listen to these fantastic recollections of the recent 9 in a row. And yes, we will cover why we didn't make it 10. Log on, pick these up every Sunday. Okay, so this is the first season of the second 9 in a row Chronicles. That we did the first one during COVID, actually. Robert, Saint, myself and Lachie Moore, who's currently on a boat somewhere, apparently. If there's nice weather, he goes sailing, so he's somewhere on Dignity, sailing around the west of Scotland with his lunch in a sunblessed bag. Anyway, so it's season 2011-12. So to set the context of that, season 2011-12 Top Watch TV programmes were the final of X Factor, which was won by Little Mix. I'm sure everybody on here was glued to that. And there was also some people from Hello magazine had a wedding. There was a royal wedding on. So that was joint with X Factor for Top Watch programme. Top film, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, apparently. Transformers, Pirates of the Caribbean, something from the Twilight Saga. Again, everybody on here would have been glued to their films. The number one on the day of the opening game of the league season was, to do the old-fashioned pop pickers, 10 points for anybody who gets this one, who can sing this one. It was The Wanted with Glad You Came. Anybody? Anybody? Nope.
Nope.
So, in the news at that time as well, it was in your world at the time, Andrew, it was the last ever edition of the News of the World.
Oh,
the weekend before the season kicked off.
A few of my friends lost their jobs there. Yeah. It was quite a difficult time for them.
And through the course of the season, we lost a few people. Amy Winehouse, she passed away on the opening weekend of the season. Joe Frazier died in the November. Whitney Houston, she died on the same weekend that Rangers Football Club went by the wayside. Steve Jobs, Colonel Gaddafi, Robin Gibb and Davy Jones. Those were people that we lost during the season. So that's setting the scene. What were you guys up to in your life, Andrew? Where were you at the time? Season 2011-12?
I was working in the midst of Scottish football for the Scotsman stroke Scotland on Sunday. And we'll come on to it, but Scotland on Sunday, we used to have our weekly calls with a company called Duff and Phelps, which was always quite entertaining about what they were saying of any given week. It was some fun stuff, I must say. It was one of the most enjoyable seasons I had. Nothing to do with Celtic, actually. But there you
go. Robert, what were you up to in your life around that time? Anything momentous in your life around that time? Season 2011-12?
I was living in... I just moved from Hong Kong, where I'd been for about 20 years, to Singapore. So, I suppose, new job, new city. But, by that stage, I was looking at doing the fixtures. I've certainly had a lot of games at the start of the season. I must have been back for the summer. But at that stage, the Celtic TV coverage was becoming much, much more reliable. And I would have seen virtually every game that season, even the ones in the middle of the night. Sure. Watch them at 3:30 or whatever. But, yeah.
Seeing anything special going on in your life at the time?
Probably the most special thing was my son was 7 and taking a real active interest in football. And everything at that age just seemed to revolve about either playing football or watching football, going to see Celtic, and writing articles for this erstwhile website as well. Sticks in my mind at the time. So,
in terms of football, we were going into this season on quite a downer. Rangers were going for 4 in a row. Strachan, we'd lost the league under Strachan in his last season. We'd had the debacle of the Mowbray season, and then we'd lost the league in Neil Lennon's first season. So we were going into that league under real pressure. And so the start of it continued that weird, odd. It was an odd start to the season. The first league weekend of the season was 23rd, 24th of July, so it was a really early start to the season. And our pre-season preparations sort of straddled the start of the season. We played pre-season games before the season kicked off, and then pre-season games after the season had kicked off, where we played in a tournament in Ireland, and it didn't go particularly well. Do you have any memories, Andrew, of the pre-season?
Well, see, when you mentioned that in Ireland, I think I was at that. Was that they played AC Milan, and it became a real kind of
Inter Milan.
Was it Inter? Sorry. They played Inter, and it became a right Barney. It was a really ill-tempered game. That's my memory of it. But my memory of it, when I was looking back there, was they signed Mo Bangura, and I know that it's not a name that lives long, but I always remember the story was that there was 2 Banguras playing in Sweden, and they didn't mean to sign Mo Bangura. That was whether it was true or no. So the rumour went around that Swedish journalists were telling journalists, here, you've signed the bad Bangura, as opposed to the good. There was a good Bangura and a bad Bangura, and you've signed the bad Bangura, and that was like so. But they did sign Adam Matthews and Kelvin Wilson. But who remembers? My son actually asked me about this guy the other day, Badir El Kaduri.
He was only signed though because as Aguirre get injured, I think if it was that no a bit of an emergency sign on loan. Yeah.
His ankle and surgery, the second league game, and really much cover left back. And I guess El Kaduri will feature when we start talking the Celtic Rangers games. Yeah, not in from down yet.
The one thing interesting, Harry, about the pre-season games was, I'm sure we played Swansea and Brendan Rodgers was the manager. Would that be right?
Yeah, we did.
It's the first time I've ever heard of Brendan Rodgers at that time, because Swansea were doing really well, and apparently they played us off the park that night, so he was beginning to make a name.
Yeah, we lost 2-0 at Swansea. So, yeah, it was not an auspicious start to the league campaign. And the weirdness, obviously Neil Lennon hadn't done so well the previous season in Europe. And then we start off, and we'll start with the Europa League qualifying, Saint. And we had the weirdest set of situations when we played Sion and we got beat, but went through. We went through 3-0 on aggregate, even though we get beat 0-0. We drew 0-0 at Celtic Park and get beat 3-1 away. So to the younger listeners, not that there are that many on our podcast, to the younger listeners or the people forgotten, saying, do you want to start, and obviously we'll go round, do you want to start with trying to give an explanation as to how we managed to go through 3-0 having lost 3-1?
Well,
first of all, Sion, we were big favourites against Sion, and I remember seeing them at Celtic Park, and they were a better team than we were led to believe that they were. So they're nothing each draw at Parkhead. Away goals still counted for something back then. Even allowing for that, there wasn't much chance. But the strange thing was, and Andrew will be able to allude to this more than me, when we were well beaten on the night, but even before the game, my recollection is that the Sion chairman says that there was two players. There was one with connection to Dundee United. I can't remember his name. And he said, I'm playing these two guys. And the newspapers picked up and they said, he can't play them because they're ineligible to play for whatever reason. And I remember the days afterwards where there was a big furore about these two guys shouldn't have played. And it became clear that Celtic had a case, and it went to UEFA, but as everything with UEFA, it took quite a while to come to a decision. Another thing about UEFA as well is, from a Celtic perspective, they've never been kind to us. You know, you think Atletico Madrid in '74, Rapid Vienna in 1984, a lot of us didn't have any faith in UEFA. But I remember it was a Friday, and the news came through that Sion had been put out, and we had qualified into the group stages. But I think because Sion had a lower coefficient than we had, we went into pot 4, whereas if we'd qualified off our own back, we'd have went into pot 2. So to cut a long story short, Sion get kicked out and we get put in a harder group than we really should have been put in.
Yeah.
Andrew, you would have been reporting on this, so...
I did. I was out in Sion that night. What a beautiful place that was. Stunning place. Celtic were murdered that night, and Mostorovic particularly, my memory is he had a shocker. But I remember that whole tie all around about that tie, because I'd read into it about their mad chairman, Christian Constantine. He's still in charge. I think he's had 50 managers. One season he had 11 managers, and he actually sacked a manager for smelling. This guy was a crazy guy, right? But they were under a transfer embargo. They weren't allowed to make transfers, and he said, stuff that. So he signed 5 players, and he says, I'm playing these guys. So, but his own FA said, you can't play these guys, you can't register these guys. They took it to the Swiss courts. They said, no, your FA is right, you can't play these guys. He took it went to CAS. I read the full CAS judgment, and so I knew it didn't even matter what happened on the pitch. So we were sitting in Sion, and everybody's saying after it, it's like, I said to I remember turning to my colleague Paul Forsyth, said, I don't know how to write this, because Celtic are out, but they're no out, because there's no way on earth the Celtic aren't going through. But nobody would build. People, it's like Stephen says, people think, you can say that, but will they really make that decision? UEFA. But it was so cut and dried. It was so clear cut. It wasn't like the Legia Warsaw one like a couple of seasons later. It was so incredibly clear cut. And this guy was just a complete maverick. He thought, I'll cock a snook to every one of the governing bodies. So it was Celtic were always going to go through, because he just played players he had no right to register and had no right to play.
How were you feeling, Robert? Because I remember looking at it thinking, this guy's crazy. Doesn't matter what. I remember, same as you, Andrew, I thought, everything I've read, this is so black and white. We're through. He's an idiot because we're through. Because I don't even know why his manager's not saying, no, I'm refusing to do this. He's playing players that we know make us through. So what is the point? Robert, were you as confident as Andrew and I?
Yeah, I just followed. I was probably reading what Andrew was writing. I think that it was important, really, really important for us in the light season. We did get through Dion because when Lennon got the job full time 12 months earlier, he basically bought a new team. So Ledley, Stokes, Collins, Mulgrew, a whole bunch of them, Berham, Kayal, etc. These guys didn't have any experience in Europe at all. And as Stephen says, we got a very tough draw after Sion were kicked out. And, it's pretty bad luck if you get drawn against a French team, an Italian team, and a Spanish team in the same sort of round. And I think it proved to be beneficial. I don't think I had much expectation. But we acquitted ourselves pretty well across the group stages. And more importantly, it's just great experience for the players. We got the benefit of that. Year later. We'll talk about it next time. Great stuff.
So we then go into the group stages, and as you point out, Stephen, we go into a group that we weren't really supposed to be in because all of this legal shenanigans and appeals were going on while UEFA were moving forward with the group. So one of the other aspects of, now they've changed it slightly, but when they'd not long for the Europa League process brought out the 6 o'clock kickoff, and initially they gave assurances to the northern, or to the teams in our time zone, basically us and Portuguese teams, that we wouldn't get 6 p.m. home games when they first brought it out. They gave that assurance. But of course, we had 6 p.m. times because we were playing a Sion's thing. So one of the things that struck me when I looked back was how low the attendances were for the group stages of this. Celtic Udinese, which I think was the first 6 p.m. kickoff one, which of course if people, even if you live and work in Glasgow and you finish work at 5 o'clock, you're struggling to get into a game at 6 o'clock at night. And there was 37,000 people at that Udinese game. So as Robert says, Stephen, we actually acquitted ourselves reasonably well in that competition. We lost 2-0 away to Atletico Madrid. We drew 1-1 at home to Udinese, and it was an 88th minute penalty from them. We drew 1-1 away to Rennes. It was an excellent performance, with the exception of Chaduri putting the ball in the back of the net. It was just one of those catastrophic, I can't believe he's done that things that Celtic do in Europe. We beat Rennes 3-1 at home. We lose to Atletico Madrid 1-0 at home, and then we draw 1 each away to Udinese. So the results were actually okay. Again, less than 30. Maybe the Rennes game was the 6 o'clock. There was less than 30,000 people at the Rennes.
The Rennes wasn't. I think maybe you're people don't maybe tend to remember that was the standard kind of attendance for Europa League. Supporters thought it was really down market to be in the Europa League. Celtic supporters, especially at that time, they between 30 and 40,000 was not unusual for Europa League games for Celtic. If you were outside of the Champions League.
We bought into the rest of Europe, didn't we? Bought into that English media narrative that the Europa League was a diddy competition. The rest of Europe didn't think like that, but the English did. So we'd bought into that.
Yeah.
Robert,
it was.
Robert,
sorry, Steve.
Sorry, Andrew, I interrupt you.
Oh no,
you go, Steve.
No, I was just going to say there, I thought Robert made a really good point there about that team gaining experience for the following league, following year in the Champions League, because we not just that as well, but Neil Lennon himself was still very inexperienced in terms of being a European manager. And I think, for all his faults, that there was some really good results that season, good performances.
Yep.
And it showed us that I think we were on the right trajectory in terms of the team improving.
Yeah, and especially away from home, it was almost just expected. Didn't matter who Celtic played away from home, but even if you think about it, even when they were getting to the last 16, they were still losing heavily to Copenhagen, and then they lost away to Aalborg. They couldn't beat anybody, so he went to Italy, where Celtic traditionally lost, and he got his draw, went to Rennes, should have won that night. Again, it's like kind of big 5 league teams going away from home and actually being able to quit yourself, not just be patsies, which was quite unusual for a Celtic team in Europe round about that time. And as Robert said, that showed a certain resilience.
We've had some great results in Europe, under Neil and Rob's tracking. And just towards the end of this tracking regime, we saw evidence of a decline in Europe, and then we had the catastrophic World season. So these were some signs, I think, of improvement in this campaign. Which we forget how successful we were in Europe. We could beat good teams. Something that's been really lacking in the last 5 or 6 years. I guess we'll talk about it as we go through these season by season.
So we had a European campaign. It was a bit like I feel we've had for many years, which is we're always making excuses for. It was actually quite good relative to the season before, and during it you're thinking, so this is an opportunity to build for the future. So I think every second European campaign for about the last 20 years has felt a bit like that. So, so we had that, and then obviously we'll get into the league season. So the league season kicked off really, really early. Stephen, it kicked off on the 24th of July. It was to do with the Euros coming up in 2012. So we started off not bad. First 3 games, away to Hibs, we won 2-0. Away to Aberdeen, we won 1-0. Home to Dundee United, we won 5-1. Then we lost at home to St Johnstone 1-0, and then won away to St Mirren 2-0. So 3 out of the first 5 games through August were away from home, and we lost the 1 game, but it was actually at Celtic Park. So, Stephen, do you want to sort of talk through how you were feeling in the start of the season in the August?
The main recollection I've got of that period is that Hooper and Stokes were beginning to have a cracking partnership, and that gave us a lot of hope. On the downside, the defence has always been an issue, and I was never convinced by Kelvin Wilson or Mastorovic or some of the other guys that were playing at that time, Glenn Louvens. So, you had the good and the bad. Going forward, we were excellent, scoring a lot of goals, creating a lot of chances. But, the old soft underbelly of many a Celtic team has been the centre of the defensive area. And I just remember having grave concerns at that time that as much as we were scoring goals, we were still pretty vulnerable. And the St Johnstone game was a Sunday. It was a horrible game. It was, I'm trying to think, it might have been around about the time of the Sion qualifiers. And it was just one of those games that, as Andrew was saying, it wasn't a great atmosphere at that time. Maybe it had been about 40,000. And the fans were just dead frustrated. And it was a Sunday. There wasn't any atmosphere. It was just a horrible, horrible afternoon. And that gave me concern at the time that Lennon hadn't exactly overcame his problems from the previous season. But I was still relatively optimistic at that time.
Robert, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I remember being at that St Johnstone game at Parkhead, and we missed a penalty very early on. I think Chris Collins missed. I think, I might be wrong, I think it was Victor Ellis debut for Celtic. He was playing at centre back rather than midfield role that he grew into. It was a smash and grab win by St Johnstone. We did not play well. Yeah, it was a bit of a blow because Rangers had got off to a decent start in the early part of the season. So there was already, they were already a bit ahead of us after 4 or 5 games.
So,
that would get much worse before it got better.
So the because we'd gone into the season with Rangers having won the last 3 titles, getting back to your point, Stephen, there was a sense the fans were in a place where they'd be quick to criticise. So a 1-0 defeat at home to St Johnstone's not going to help. We then go into September, and we always have that. It always frustrates me that the end of the transfer window, and we sign players right at the end of the transfer window, and then you have the international break, so you actually sign people and then can't see them for 2 weeks. Always really frustrates me. So September has fewer games in it. We beat Motherwell 4-0 at home, and we beat Inverness 2-0 at home, but sandwiched in between them was a defeat to Rangers. You definitely would have been at Ibrox, Andrew. Celtic lost 4-2. Do you remember much about that game?
I do. Actually, I was at Ibrox, but my friend, that's the last time I was ever in the Broomloan stand. Because I was working, my days were kind of Tuesday to Saturday, so the game was on a Sunday, I remember. And he said, "Look, I've got a spare ticket." I said, "I haven't been in here for 15 years. I couldn't remember the last time I was in there, because I worked for all those subsequent years." So he said, "Why don't you come for old time's sake? Just come to the Broomloan stand and sit among the punters." So I remember going down, and I thought, can't be bothered to take my car or anything, so I'll go on the tube. And I went in the tube, and my timekeeping's not the greatest. So I went in the tube, and I got there about 5 minutes before kick-off, and what I'll never forget is the tube was empty. It was completely empty. And it was weird walking for the tube, because normally I would go to the tube when I was covering games, but I'd go to the tube and then I'd just walk into the main stand. But I was actually going to the tube and walking. I thought I was going to walk through all these Rangers supporters to get to all these Celtic supporters. I hardly saw a soul. I don't know what it was. Hardly saw a soul. And all the way round to go to the Broomloan stand and meet him just a couple of minutes before kick-off. And I remember Naismith had a habit of turning up for these games. And it was 4-2, if I remember rightly, didn't it? And he scored twice, did he?
Yeah.
Is that right? Am I getting that one right?
Yeah, he scored twice. The second goal was the fourth in injury time.
Rangers very much deserved it. Celtic were okay in the first half, but they just capitulated in the second half. Is my memory. They were really, as Stephen said, the flakiness in defence just that haunted them at that period. Because if you think about it, I mean, like, people forget it was McCoist. Rangers were under new management, Ali McCoist. Rangers' first 10 league games, because I remember I was at a lot of them. Like, he drew one and won 9. That was his high point as a football manager. Was that first 2 months of the 2011-12 season? Meanwhile, all the while, Craig White wasn't paying any tax on top of the tax that hadn't been paid before. So it was all, you know what I mean. The car crash was, we were just watching it in slow motion. That was why I think a lot of supporters, because they would have wanted Lennon's head in a stick, but everybody thought, well, it's coming. The snowball is rolling down the hill, you know what I mean? And Rangers have just got to get buried under it. It's like that Labour advert, the tax bombshell. It was like almost we had this in a billboard with this with Rangers in it, and it was just Rangers and we were just waiting for it.
So Robert, and I'll get onto a story about the waiting for it thing. So Robert, do you remember much? Because we were 2-1 up in that game at half time. We were, and we mentioned El Kaddouri. So, tell us about it.
He hit, I guess, what used to be called a daisy cutter, 50 yards out, and it was a feeble effort. And I think McGregor actually went down on one knee just to collect it. And it went through his legs. I think it was right before half time. And I think it was 2-1. But it scored an excellent earlier to equalise. But second half just didn't turn up. I remember they were hitting a lot of balls to the back post for Lafferty. It was up against Al-Kaduri. It was of the same, diminutive stature as Ezagiri, who he'd replaced in the team. So the Rangers' tactic was to use Lafferty's height against their left back. And I think as Andrew just said, they were all over the second half. I do remember vividly Charlie Mulgrew getting sent off. I don't know if it was a straight red or 2 yellows, but he wiped somebody out. Might have been Naismith or Davis. Sent off, and Lennon complained heavily about the red card decision, but it looked like a shocker, is what's in my memory. But I mean, that was a tough defeat, having lost to St Johnstone. Rangers, as Andrew said, off to a terrific start, just one slip up at the first game of the season against Hearts. So they were already 6, 7, 8 points ahead of us. And a difficult period for Lennon, where there was no margin for that. And Rangers were relying so much on Champions League money to get automatic qualification. And I think Rangers were budgeting for that. Make the stages.
That's an interesting point about the Champions League there, but Harry, because I remember sitting in my car in Paisley, of all places. I remember us vividly listening to Radio Scotland, and I can't remember it was Rangers and Malmo, right? So, and it was really tight. I think Malmo were winning in away goals, and in the last seconds of the game, Jelavic broke through, and he'd won one with the keeper, and I'm sitting in the car thinking, oh no, he's going to score this. They're going to go through. And it's just when Robert said there how they were reliant on the Champions League money, and he missed the chance, and almost immediately the final whistle went, and the feeling of relief in the car for me, just sitting myself in this. I think my son was playing football that night, and I just went to the car to listen to the radio, and it just there's almost sometimes you get a premonition, and I remember thinking at the time, that's it, without the Champions League money they're done for, because the off the pitch headlines were taking precedence to the on the pitch headlines at that time, and that lose. I mean, McCoy's, for example, I think he lost to Malmo, and then Andrew, I can't remember it. Who did he lose to?
Maribor.
Maribor. There you go.
Yeah.
So he lost 2 qualifiers, and I think Craig White alluded to that later on in the season. That if he'd have got some money coming in at that time, whether it was Champions League or Europa League, they might have been able to keep the doors open. So that's a really important thing to highlight. The Malmo defeat was catastrophic.
Yeah, he hated him. White blamed him. He blamed him for. Remember, if you've seen his book and all that, this guy was never a football manager because he was, as you say, he was banking on some kind of European money.
Income.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was interesting that in the next couple of seasons, Maribor both came to Parkhead. Sometimes get
beat us
as well. But I did read Craig White's book when it came out 3 or 4 years ago. And there's one, I mean, half of the book is utter crap, but there's 2 or 3 chapters which are essential reading. But one of them is after the Malmo and Maribor games, they steadfastly at that point stopped paying PAYE. HMRC. The only cash flow that they could effectively save and generate was not paying PAYE, not paying VAT, not paying national insurance contributions, and it was certainly triggered by those 2 European defeats, or became more extreme as a result of those 2 European defeats. So I know we're supposed to be talking about Europe, but we're just going to keep on.
Yeah. Well, it didn't exist, the 2 clubs. So they've never been so entwined in terms of what happened to both of them than that season. That was a season that just, that was everything in sense.
Well, it is, And you mentioned the two sort of rookie managers, Andrew, and my tale. This is what I always sort of tell if you speak to Rangers fans about you let your club die, and they say, well, what else could we have done? And well, you could have been ready to deal with it when the problem came, but how did we know it was going to happen? Well, I always use the tale of used to go down to the cricket in the summer. Me and my brother and a couple of mates, we'd go to a one day international or something somewhere during the summer months. And I could take you to the street in Manchester where myself, my brother, and one of our mates who's a Rangers fan, we're walking away from the game, we're walking back to the car, and the Rangers fan mate says, you guys had a bad season under Lennon. He's a club legend. We've now got McCoist in charge. And I think back to how long we allowed John Gregg to go because he was a club legend. We allowed him to manage the team in more dire straits than I think modern football fans would allow. Do you think, we both got it, do you think the fans would turn on these legends quicker than we turned on John Gregg back in the 80s? I mean, do you think if you're not if it's clear that you're not going to win the league by Christmas, that your fans will just turn on Lennon and he'll be fired, he'll go? And I remember, like, both at exactly the same time, my brother and I both turned and said, well, it won't matter because you guys are going bust this season. It was just so, we just all knew it was going to happen. And so this defence that Rangers fans have of we didn't know and we knew. I mean, it was such a, the thing about it is always going about that, the way that my brother and I said it, it was so matter of fact that it was just, everybody knew it was going to happen. I mean, our website had mentioned EBTs like 2 years earlier. Everybody knew it was going to happen.
But we all got it wrong. Let's be honest here. We all got it wrong because if you remember, the first tier tribunal about EBTs was supposed to make its judgment that October. Now that's another reason why Craig White wasn't paying anything, because he said, I'm throwing good money after bad. I'm throwing it into a pit here because what will happen is I want to do the switcheroo. Once the first tier tribunal finds against Rangers for their use of EBTs, or misuse, as I used to write. Misuse, it wasn't, if you used them properly, you might have got away with it, but it was misuse of EBTs. So it was supposed to find in October, and then when it came to the October, it was delayed, if you remember. It was delayed. It wasn't actually for another it wasn't another year until they actually, and when the first judgment came, the judgment found in favour of Rangers, if you remember rightly. So he miscalculated. White miscalculated. He thought, I'm not paying all this money because it's just going to be money I'm throwing down a well. So what I'll wait till that judgment comes in October, and he saw it as well. He saw there was a misuse of EBTs, and he said, right, I'll put the club into administration, do the switcheroo, new company and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll go again, and it'll be this slate is wiped clean. Even though I've paid new contracts to the likes of Stephen Naismith and 26 grand a week, Stephen Whittaker 24 grand a week. He paid all these. He created this huge wage bill because he knew he wasn't paying it, or he thought he wasn't paying it, because he was only going to pay this wage bill for 2 months and then say to them, guys, we need to chip over your contracts. But none of that happened. So we kind of got it right, but we got it wrong, because it wasn't the EBTs that put Rangers, that finished Rangers in the February. It was like Al Capone. Al Capone didn't get done for killing people. He get done because, you know what I mean, he's kind of financial affairs. So that's what happened.
It was as somebody once said to me, gangsters always drive at 30 miles an hour in built up areas because they don't want to get caught for they don't want to get caught for speeding when it doesn't really matter.
So we kind of got it right, but we kind of got it wrong, because it wasn't actually. We all thought October. We all looked forward to everything. October comes, Rangers are gone. But the first tier tribunal was delayed, as these things. And so he hadn't paid the tax, he hadn't paid the PAYE, as Robert's saying, he hadn't paid anything. So they had to go into administration because of his cash flow. And once they were in administration, Robert, never coming out again.
Well, and so that was the thing, Robert. We lose to Rangers, then we beat Inverness Cali at home. Then we lose to Hearts at Tynecastle. And then we have the game at Rugby Park. We were 3-0 down at half-time. And increasingly the fear that Andrew sort of alludes to there, increasingly the fear is that they might actually get into administration, get their points penalty, and because we are losing these games, and that actually they could get their points penalty and still be in the title. And that would be the ultimate disaster. So at 3-0 down at half-time at Kilmarnock, this is what's looming large. So, Robert, talk us through that Kilmarnock game. Where were you? How did you? What was going on, etc.?
I actually watched home in Hong Kong, and I think Neil Lennon admitted that he was 45 minutes away from kick fight that day. I think it was in October or something like that. And the second half, James Forrest, 20 years old, that kid, maybe had his most important 45 minutes. I was going to stay in the hoops, but I don't think we'll win the hoops that day, or green or something. But so Forrest helped set up Stokes for 2 goals, which sparked the comeback. Grew a header for the equaliser. And even after that, Kilmarnock could have won it. They missed an absolute sitter. I think Fraser pulled off a great save. And then I think we had a chance to win it right at the end. But there's, half-time you would have taken 3-3 any day. And it was the turning point in the season for Neil Lennon and for the team. I think it gave the team great belief that, they could come back from adversity. And we really kicked on after that result, went on a tremendous run, which reined back, what had been. I think Rangers were 15 points ahead at the day we played Kilmarnock. So it was critical. Could Rangers have survived the season and still won the league? Maybe that's a matter for some debate. I couldn't remember, Andrew, when the first tribunal, when the Justice Nicholas Smith decision, ridiculous.
Well, that was different. That's different from the tax tribunal. That was a football. The Lord Nimmo Smith thing was 2012, and at that time, the tax that had found in favour, the tribunals had found in favour of Rangers. They weren't liable for any tax. It twice found in favour of Rangers, 2012, 2014, and it took until it went to the appeal court in 2015 that it found that it said they were emollients and they should have paid their tax and national insurance on them. And then in 2017 they'd appealed it and the appeal was thrown out. So this was a lot. These are two different, all these kind of timescales.
Yeah. Smith's decision that Rangers have not enjoyed any competitive advantage through the use of the EBTs was an astonishing decision. I read the whole 140-page report, and the dissenting view by a judge whose name was Kim, I remember, a lady judge, was a...
These are two different things. Lord Nimmo Smith was a football decision, and the HMRC, the third tribunal. See, because that was a footballer just saying, Lord Nimmo Smith was saying there was no competitive advantage because at that time they decided they weren't liable to pay tax. The EBTs were okay. They'd kind of waved them through, apart from the dissenting judge, Judge Kim, if you remember, who said this is an abomination. And the other two guys, there was all sorts of stories about the other two guys on the tribunal.
It was ridiculous, but the reality of the situation is that Rangers were running on empty. Rangers' balance sheet was a busted flush probably by October.
Yeah, the 5th of November it was when Rangers won 2-1 at home to Dundee United. They played 2 games more than Celtic by then. They were 15 points ahead, and Celtic went to Motherwell. If you remember that one, Stephen. They were still not in great form, but they scraped a 2-1, and that was when it changed. Thereafter that, I think they won 17 straight games, Celtic. Something. It changed. It was like bonfire night, you know? Bonfire of Rangers' vanities. You know, like...
The Kilmarnock one at Rugby Park, I can remember that day vividly. And there's good reason to remember it for 2 reasons. Number one, it was my son's first away game ever took him to. He was only 7. So he'll remember that for the rest of his days. But the other thing as well is, interestingly, it was the 30th anniversary of John Doyle's passing. And there was John Doyle's grave is very, very close to Rugby Park. I didn't appreciate it's only about 5 minutes drive from Kilmarnock's ground. And it was a Celtic Grave Society had a nice wee get-together, and a lot of the ex-Celtic players turned up. And I was really optimistic we were going to win that day. My son's first away game, Johnny Doyle's memory. You know, and at half-time, we're sitting there, me and Michael, and he turns into me and he says, "It's not supposed to be like this, Dad, is it?" And I'm like, no, not really. But I'll tell you, I was so proud of the Celtic fans that day. One of the proudest days I've ever had. Because when the team came out for the second half, they got a massive roar. And nobody turned against Lennon, nobody turned against the players. And I genuinely believe that the Celtic fans dragged them back into the game that day, because see if the team had come onto the park to boos and jeers, we were done for. But the fact that there was a huge roar, the fans got behind the team, that was the main point that got us back into the game. Another thing as well, I remember going home. I think our game kicked off early, and I remember going home and I was literally lying on top of my bed, just sort of like relaxing, right? I was shattered, had a long day, and the phone went, and I thought, who's phoning at this time? It was only maybe it was early evening, and it was a pal of mine, and he says, Did you hear? And I says, heard what? He says, Gary Taylor scored for St Mirren in 95 minutes at Ibrox, and they've got a draw. So see for Celtic losing at half-time and going further behind Rangers, who would obviously beat St Mirren quite convincingly, we managed to get a draw that day, but it's really important to appreciate that Gary Taylle goal. From a Rangers perspective, put them in a...
I was at Ibrox that day, aye.
You'll be able to describe it, Andrew. I mean, the Rangers support don't take to that very, very kindly.
Yeah, no, you're dead right. And that Celtic game as well, I think I'm right in saying it was the first time, I think it's still the only time in Celtic's history they've ever not lost a game from being 3-0, league game from being 3-0 down. Because under Mowbray, the previous year was the first, 2 years earlier, when they drew 3-3 to Rapid Vienna, if you remember out there in the Europa League group. That was, and they come back to 3-0 down. That was the first time in their history they'd ever come back to 3-0 down in any competition. So the Kilmarnock day became the first time in their history in a league game they'd ever not lost a game from being 3-0 down.
I've just had a quick glance there at the record of the game, and it's not quite what I remember, because Celtic's first goal by Stokes was 73 minutes.
Right.
We fired up after half time, and our goals were in 73, 76, and 80 minutes. And I do remember at the time thinking, there must be time to win this game, to win.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, there were chances at both ends. It was a schoolboy game in the last 10 minutes, just end to end stuff. Yeah,
Stokes
fantastic.
was amazing. I think Stokes, I mean, I know you mentioned James Forrest, and rightly so, but Stokes just took it by the scruff of the neck. Stokes really, that was one of his crowning glory days in a Celtic strip, as I remember, because he really did, he dragged them. He really did drag them back into that game.
I think only surpassed by Stokes' performance for Hibs in the
Scottish Cup final. Yeah.
Which was...
Yeah. I was going to say that when I think about the two games, the Stokes games, that's probably the two I think of.
Mm-hmm. My boy was 18 months old at the time, and someone was looking after him for one of the first times for the whole day. So I'd promised my wife we would go out for the day. And I remember we went in for some lunch at 3-0. And I switched my phone. And I actually, that way, you were sort of, you can be uptight when there's a Celtic game that you're having difficulty getting access to see. I remember being quite relaxed. at 3-0 at half-time. I remember putting my phone off and thinking, oh well, by the time I switched this back on, Neil Lennon will have been sacked. Because it was that way of, a bit like the Mowbray defeat at Love Street, that you think, right, if we're 3-0 at half-time, we might lose this 4 or 5. And that's the type of result that it doesn't, his departure doesn't drag out. You start to become a bit pragmatic and you go, well, benefit is his departure won't be dragged out. It's happening early on in the season. It'll be tonight or tomorrow they'll go. Yeah. A bit like Barnes had to go after the Inverness Cali defeat. A bit like Mowbray had to go after the St Mirren defeat, that you're thinking it's not going to get dragged out. So that's actually quite good. It's all going to happen really quickly in October. We've still got a chance. I remember just thinking all of that. And then, later on in the day, switch the phone back on. You're like, wow, we drew that. And a bit like you, Robert, my immediate reaction was, it's a bit of a disappointment that we couldn't get, if we got 3 goals back, why couldn't we have got a 4th? that was your reaction. So yeah, that was, and Lennon himself says, I don't know, did he say I don't know, you'll have got the post-match press conference stuff, Andrew. Did he say that he said to the players at half-time, I'm going to get fired? Or was it just him thinking at half-time,
I think it was just fired? My memory, because he'd refer back to it, obviously, when they won the league and all that, because that was such a pivotal moment. But he said, I'm out. I think it was more him in his head thinking, I'm gone here if we don't turn this around. And you could, all this stuff about players weren't playing for him and all that, and you saw it in the second half. As you say, Robert, it's a lot later than, they left a lot later than I'd thought, in your mind, how your mind plays tricks with you. They only really got it together the last 25 minutes or whatever, 27 minutes. But they
a bit like the centenary season. My memory of the centenary season in the cup final was thinking there was loads of time left in the game for us to win it when we were still losing, when there wasn't. But just at the time, you just thought, we've still got time to win this game. It's fine.
Yeah. I know, it's weird how your memory really does play tricks with you.
So you're right, Robert. That changes the dynamic of everything. We beat Aberdeen at home 2-1. Although we then draw 0-0 at home to Hibs, but thereafter it is just win after win after win. There's lots of 1-goal victories: 2-1 against Kilmarnock at home, 1-0 against Hearts at home, 1-0 away to Dundee United, 2-1 at Dunfermline at home, 2-1 away to Motherwell, as you point out. And all through that period, and then we get to, it wasn't a New Year game, it was a 28th of December game at Celtic Park against Rangers, Robert. So your thoughts, but during that November, all I remember through that October and November is every single Radio Scotland, it was Radio Scotland I'd moved over to by that point, I moved away from Clyde, it was to, and every single programme on Radio Scotland was talking about the tax with Rangers, every single week. It was just this momentum, as you pointed out, Andrew, it was just this snowball rolling down the hill of the debt that they were in. So Robert, what's your memories of that October, November, December, and then the 28th of December Rangers game?
The game that I remember, apart from the Rangers game, was the game against Hearts at Parkhead, when we won 1-0, and Fraser Forster saved a penalty in the very last minute of the game. And I think we're still about 5 points behind Rangers at that point. But Big Victor had smacked one in from about 25 yards with the outside of his right foot, right in the roof of the net. It was a bit of an ugly game. We hadn't played well. Great goal by Wanyama, and then the Forster's penalty save. I can't remember who took the penalty for Hearts, but that was vital. And I think Rangers dropped points that day as well, which meant that come 28th of December, we played them. Was it a Wednesday night game? Or was it just a...
Was it just a Wednesday?
Wednesday night.
No, it was
I think in the middle
Wednesday
of the night
game, aye.
I got up to watch it in the middle of the night in Hong Kong. And we needed to win that game to go top of the league, to place them at the top. And Joe Ledley got on the end of a corner at the back post, got it well, put it away. But my other memory of that game is Foster made a brilliant save early on from Lee Wallace. early in the first half, fantastic reaction save, which we saw so many times from Forster. And I think in the second half we ended up running out deserved winners, even though it stayed at 1-0. I mean, that was, we didn't look back after that. We stayed top, irrespective of the 10-point penalty that was coming to Rangers' way. So,
I hope I'm no misremembering this, and Stephen, you'll tell me if I was. Was that the McCulloch tackling Berham Kyle that night? That
yes.
Kyle was kind of...
Yeah.
That was the...
Was that
he
not
never
the Scottish,
really...
Was that not the Scottish Cup tie, the previous season?
You're right, Andrew, because Kyle, I thought, had been tremendous these first 18 months for the club. He was really doing a great job in the midfield, and we never really saw the best of him again after. He was out for a long time after that tackle, right over next to the dugout, as I recall.
Was that night, or am I getting mixed up? Stephen was saying he thought it was maybe the...
No, you're right.
It was that night, definitely. All right. You've got a really good memory for this, Robert. It's almost kind of photographic. It's amazing. I love it.
Some of the other games in that October-November period, Harry, I don't recall them at all. I remember the excitement of being on a good run, winning every week, narrowing the gap every week. You don't know that Rangers are going to go bust during the course of the season and incur a penalty. There was some talk about it. But there was also a feeling that, okay, somebody might, fund them through the season. Obviously they'd lost David Murray, who'd been funding them in all sorts of ways for many, many years. Craig White, with his off-the-radar wealth, as reported by Keith Jackson, turned out to nothing of the sort. So, at the end of at that stage, I'm really just concentrating on what's happening on the field, and getting in front of them by the turn of the year was very significant. And, clearly, as we progressed into January, then, the wheels were coming off at Ibrox. And, they started to drop more points. They were under a lot of pressure. So, I think Lennon, I seem to remember Lennon at some point, it might have been the end of the season. Ali McCoist had to deal with a whole number of issues as a manager of the football club, which managers should never have to deal with. So Lennon, I think the league must have been safely won. He expressed some sympathy for, what McCoist had to deal with in the previous months.
Stephen, that run we talked about, Robert picked out the Hearts game, and that's the game I think that we went top of the league. And I remember Victor Wanyama, it was a great strike. But the other thing I remember was I'd been unsure about Fraser Forster initially in his first loan period, because he was young. I think he'd only become a goalkeeper of any sort at about 17 or 18 or something like that. And here he was at 22, 23 playing for Celtic. So in his whole career, his whole life, I should say, he'd only been a goalkeeper. And I felt lots of his errors were decision-making errors. He would come out to someone when he should have stayed in, and stay in when he should have come out, and lots of that. And the thing that really struck me was he'd looked nowhere in the couple of penalties that had been against him prior to that. And it was the very last minute of the game that Hearts got the penalty. And you're just thinking, bollocks, we were going to go top of the league. And then you just resigning to the fact that Hearts are going to score the penalty. And he saved it. And I think for me, that was not the Kilmarnock game. For me, that was the game that was transformational in my thoughts on the league season, that Hearts game. Because it was again, people forget, Wanyama was a prospect who was coming into the team, and he wasn't getting a game every week, and it was round about the November time that Wanyama became a player, a fixture. And then Fraser Forster saves a penalty. So that whole spelling right up to the Rangers game on the 28th. Anything stand out for you, Stephen?
Yeah, I've got to say that the one game that stands out for me, you don't very often get games played on Christmas Eve, and the Kilmarnock game was played on Christmas Eve, and very, very unusually, Rangers played at Love Street at the same time, because normally these days, for the last 20 years or so, Celtic and Rangers don't play at the same time. You know, one plays on a Saturday, one plays on a Sunday, one plays at lunchtime, one plays at 3 o'clock. So again, my son's 7, it's Christmas Eve, and we're watching the game. Celtic's winning quite comfortably. Rangers are winning at half-time, and then halfway through the second half, a massive roar goes on the stadium. One of the roars that we're old enough to remember back in the days when it was 3 o'clock kickoffs, and you would turn around and say, Aberdeen scored against Rangers, you know, because you just know, because it starts off as a wee sort of just a wee noise, and it builds up into a crescendo to a big massive roar, and everybody looks at each other and goes, oh yes. And my son's looking at me and he's going, what's they cheering for, Dad? And I said, St Mirren scored against Rangers. How do you know? I said, no, you need to believe me. And then 5 minutes later, a second roar went up, even louder. And he said, do you think St Mirren scored again? I went, yes. And obviously there's a guy running about you somewhere that with a radio with some degree or a phone, and everybody began to give the thumbs up that St Mirren had, and I think Aaron Moy scored the winner. I don't know, mate. I'm sure it was the day Aaron Moy scored against Rangers, and he scored a cracking goal. And as everybody has been saying there, that this good run that we're on, it's not just the fact Celtic's in a good run. They're not playing well. They're not getting results. So that was the game before we played them on the Wednesday night between Christmas and New Year. And I was never so confident for years that we were going into a game on form and they were going into a game not playing well, and we were going to win that. But the game was tighter than it was. It was actually a fantastic goal by Joe Ledley, which won the game. But what sticks in my mind that day is, and Robert might not know this, but the other guys will, the weather was terrible in Glasgow. It was like hurricanes. Really, really excessive winds, storms. And there was actually a rumour the day before the game that the game would get postponed because the forecast was that Glasgow was to get hit with these really, really strong winds. And it was an awful conditions for players to play football. And I just remember being really relieved at the end of the game that we got that game played and we beat them.
Yeah, you're right, by the way. I just looked it up, Stephen. Aaron Moy scored that day. McGowan got the other one, so that would have probably, I suppose, like it was quite and it was 2-1. I didn't recollect that. I think I must have been off that week or whatever. I can't remember, because I tended to be, if I wasn't at Celtic, I was at Rangers. So, and I think I was at a lot more Rangers that season, bizarrely. Just sometimes the way the games work out. You know, I think the Celtic play quite a few Sunday games then, so I would tend to be following the Saturday.
It would have been the Europa League, so there would have been a lot of Sunday games for us.
Yeah, so, and Rangers, of course, weren't in Europe, so they would have been playing in the Saturdays, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we are top of the league. We beat Rangers at home, and then we are winning games. We have, and I'm going to slightly change the order I was going to do this, because I'll make the break where we talk about the League Cup after an event that happens in February. So we beat Dunfermline away 3-0. We beat Dundee United at home 2-1. We beat St Mirren away 2-0. We win at Tynecastle 4-0. And then we beat Inverness at home 1-0. And then an event happens that just transforms Scottish football. Probably possible, at least for it's not finished yet, but at least for 30 years, 40 years. So before I go into that event and where you were in that JFK moment of where you were when you find out, anything memorable about those games through January for anybody? Robert, anything?
Me, I don't recall anything exceptional except that we were winning. We were getting clean sheets, but I can't remember who was in central defence that season. Kelvin Wilson would be one, but who was he playing alongside?
I think it was Louvens mostly. My story that she fell out of favour. I think Louvens was in there. And maybe Mulgrew as well. I think Mulgrew came on to a game that season as the season progressed.
That's right. I saw Thomas Rogner. When I was looking at that Motherwell game earlier on, he'd played, but obviously he could never stay fit, because I always had some kind of, Always thought that he could have been a decent enough player if his fitness hadn't let him down so regularly.
So Rangers have been bought by. Sorry.
Given that, it was quite a new defence, really, that season. Matthews was new. I think, did we sign Lustig in that window?
January.
In that window, and he turns out to be, a bit of a legend for, for various reasons. So, his hats and stuff like that. But it was a pretty new defence. Izagiri out injured for most of the season. Storage, I think, got eased to the side, and so maybe Yama's playing there sometimes, Ronya, Okuru. So we were getting quite a few clean sheets in this winning run, which is always good when that happens.
So you'd mentioned earlier, or someone had mentioned about the wealth off the radar comment. I remember, so you'll get into your thing, Andrew. I remember it through more into 2012, just through what I was doing with work. I was doing a lot of stuff down in London, and I happened to then start to interact with a lot of people. You'll know this, Robert. I started to find out that in the city of London, in the sort of sub-£100 million mark, there's a lot of dodgy people around there, really, really dodgy people, and they were and they were all the people who seemed to be interacting with Rangers a lot. All these people, they were all. I mean, they had money and they interacted with people with money, but the sort of 50 to 100 million pound band. I always say that they saw the law was like, I always used to say, they saw the law a bit like one of these rulers you got at school, the shatterproof rulers. You could bend it quite a bit before one day it would just snap and break. But you had that flexibility that the law wasn't fixed in stone for these people. And somebody told me this brilliant tale about Craig White's wealth off the radar. And if you remember, there's lots of pictures of him with celebrities. And what they said was, what had happened was there was some big charity event taking place, it wouldn't happen now, taking place in St. Petersburg. It was, some sort of United Nations charity event, where, it's like 50 grand a table type thing. And that Craig White had bought a table at this event. And then when the sort of hello type photographers going around taking pictures, Craig White, he hires two attractive ladies. I don't want to sound sexist and call them dolly birds, but he hires two attractive ladies with him to go to this event so that people like taking pictures of beautiful people. And so he goes round with them and gets his picture taken with all the famous people there. George Clooney's there. And so if you look back at Craig White in lots of pictures at the time, in particularly the likes of the Daily Record of Craig White, to illustrate his wealth off the radar, he's black tie and he's taken with these celebs. But it's all the one night. It's all the same night in St. Petersburg where all the celebs are there. And this person in the city was telling me it was all part of his plan to portray this image that he had greater wealth than he had, that he'd gone to this event. I always felt the Rangers going bust was a bit like one of these films, where somebody sells their soul to the devil, and then the devil then comes to reap his reward and get the soul back up, and everything goes to shit for them thereafter. And they're desperately trying to avoid the devil reclaiming the soul that he sold to them, and this was just their comeuppance. I mean, for me, football is about the joy of the moment and celebrating your history. And for 10 plus years, they stole that from us. So I have absolutely zero sympathy for them. They robbed us of stuff through everything they did. So I had no sympathy.
Harry, they didn't only rob us. I keep making that point to friends who are St Mirren fans, Motherwell fans, Hearts fans, and they'll say, was it just Celtic that get robbed here? They robbed you as well. And one of the best things I think happened from Rangers' demise was from the years 2012 to 2016, but when Rodgers took over at Celtic, there was a great spread for the cup trophies, not in the league, but there was a great spread in the domestic trophies in Scottish football, where St Mirren won a trophy, Hearts won a trophy, Hibs won a trophy,
and Johnston,
St Johnstone, Inverness, Ross County.
Yeah.
That's a sort of like a wee golden period for the non-Glasgow clubs, if you like, because Rangers were at the bracket at that point. On a critical point, you could say Celtic should have done better. But shouldn't they be losing finals to Kilmarnock and games at Hampden to Hearts and things like that. But you know, to be fair, those teams were cheated as well. It wasn't just Celtic.
I know, and some of the EBT victims were Queen of the South, who lost the Scottish Cup final to Rangers. Falkirk lost the Cup final. Ayr United. So teams that rarely have their day in the sun came up against, this debt-fueled Rangers team. There was a comment that I read that when Rangers won the league at Easter Road in that shameful match in 2005 when Tony Mowbray's Hibs wouldn't cross the halfway line, every single Rangers player on the field had an EBT.
Mm-hmm.
The day we lost the league at Fir Park. So
they're not the only cheats. I mean, my friend's a St Johnstone season ticket holder, and his resentment of Hearts, and you speak to Hibs fans, they talk about the 5-1. That was a debt-fueled Hearts team. Everybody cheats. It's not just Rangers in the sense that anybody who goes into administration or liquidation or whatever, they're all cheats. And my St Johnstone pal gets really upset about it because so many in Scotland did. They were spending beyond their means. So I said they weren't the one and only. They weren't the biggest and baddest, but they weren't the one and only.
I think it's whether you're right things.
Whether you're
sorry, Robert.
Or whether you're cheating a taxpayer, there's a difference, I think. So
that's my point. There's cheating because you're just accumulating debt, and that's bad financial management by the bank and not pulling that in earlier. Or there's cheating because you're getting the taxpayer to fund your success. And that, for me, is why it's unforgivable for Rangers.
Do you know what annoys me about all this? The kind of moral crusades that Celtic supporters go on. And I've had my back and forth with a lot of them. That season, Celtic played this season we're talking about, they played Atletico Madrid, right? Atletico Madrid, whose president came out and said, some people have bank debt. We've got tax debt. They owed the tax man 56 million. And not a single Celtic supporter, as far as I'm concerned, because I've spoken to a lot of them online, I said, did you contact UEFA to say Celtic should be back, or they should get some kind of recompense for what happened to them in the Europa League against a team who had a £56 million tax debt? But they seem to think, well, that's not... They wrote back to me and said, oh, no, that's not our concern. I said, yes, it is. You played Atletico Madrid. You were losing to a team that shouldn't have been allowed in. But you only seem to care about Rangers. Why do you only care about Rangers?
Well, I agree with you to some extent, but here's the other point. It wasn't my money that went into Atletico Madrid, but it was my money that went into Rangers.
But
They
surely,
took my personal... I was getting home during that period at 10, 11 o'clock at night to fund Rangers. If you want to really strip it out. That's why my preference would be that club went bust, closed down, mothballed, whatever it was, and they had to start in whatever league Gretna started in. That would have been my preference.
The Craig White thing's a funny one because one of my neighbours, who I know really well, his wife is related to Craig White, the first cousin. And I remember saying to my neighbour, I says, oh, by the way, I said, that Craig White guy's a billionaire. And he went, no, he's not. And I said, okay, right, he's not a billionaire, he's a millionaire. And he went, no, he's not. And he told me a wee bit about Craig White that he knew. And I remember, Brian will be able to remember this better than me. One of our colleagues put a great article in the early days of the Celtic Underground website. And he basically Googled Craig White's background, right? Just basic, a Google search. And he came up with this stuff, and he basically debunked everything that Keith Jackson or any of the other journalists had said about Craig White. And it became so obvious at that point that Craig White was not what he was portrayed to be. But we all knew that. But nobody from a Rangers background, in terms of their support base, could do a Google search or could delve into it. And somebody actually made a point to me that it really goes back to our roots as a club. I would imagine that our father, certainly in my own case, my dad was a trade unionist, very keen trade unionist, and he used to question everything at any given time. not because he was being negative, but because he could see through things that people had said to him through his life that didn't materialise. And he used to say, no, that you need to look closer at these things. There's very often you need to scratch underneath it. And nobody did that with Craig White. And I find that astonishing that the Glasgow Herald, the Scotsman, what I would call the heavyweight newspapers, couldn't do an insight into Craig White to find out what was happening.
I wrote a piece about the fact that he didn't have the kind of money that was getting talked about. And do you know why I wrote the piece? Because he employed a PR firm called McCarry and Hay, I think they were called. And you spoke to them. And I says, I've worked this out. I says, I've worked this out at the back of a fag packet economics, but he needs at least 55 million to reinvigorate Rangers. And they went, he didn't have that. He's not going to put that in. That's not going to happen. I said, well, you're going nowhere. But in the bargain, people say that everybody, said he'd all this money. The Rangers board at the time were telling Murray, you can't sell to this guy. I mean, we shouldn't rewrite history. They didn't want him because they knew he was a spirit. They knew he was a no-user. If you remember all the back and forth and telling him, he said, I have to sell. He said, my hands are tied because the bank are telling me. Because the one thing Craig White was going to get, Craig White was getting the bank back their 18 million from ticketus. From Rangers, he was mortgaging future season ticket sales. So he was getting them back, and all the bank wanted was out of it. They wanted some money back because Murray cost the bank 330 million or whatever with his debt mountain. And so they wanted at least something back from that. So everybody knew all this. This wasn't known subsequently. Everybody knew all this.
There's one other wee personal memory around about that time. We played Hearts and we pumped them 4-0, I think, at 10 cans.
4-0, yeah.
I was coming at my work at 5:30 that night. I thought I was late. And Paul McBride getting into the lift, the guy who was very friendly with Lennon, the lawyer. And I said to Paul McBride, it was just the two of us in the lift, and I said to Paul McBride, are you going to the game? And he went, aye. And I says, well, you're running a bit late. It's 5:30 noon, you've got to get to Tynecastle. And he went, I know. He says, I'm getting picked up. And he actually sprinted out the door. And it's very sad to say, Paul McBride died just a matter of weeks after that. And the only reason I'm raising that is that I know somebody who's close to Neil Lennon, and it affected him really badly. He was very, very friendly with Paul McBride. And that period must have been very difficult for Lennon.
Yeah, I interviewed Paul McBride up in his Park Circus. It was mad. It had all these... It was like, like the stuff that Michael Jackson was buying, like these Egyptian busts and all that. It was a really weird decor. It was a really, really weird decor. And I said, do you have any children? And he went, has nobody told you I'm gay? And then his partner come in kind of thing. I went, oh, no, I'm sorry. I just, I wasn't prying. It was just like, this kind of questions you ask when you're doing a profile of someone, But it was good value. It was great value. But the Celtic Sports hated it because he said referees, because he'd been a linesman, he said referees aren't biased. And I got so much stick for that. And I said, I'm only reporting what the guy said to me. But there you go.
So, on to the moment when it all happened. I can remember vividly where I was. I was in a meeting in an office in Livingston, and I was with a colleague who's not a football fan. And my phone was on silent, but it was on vibrate. You know how when it's on vibrate, it still makes that. And halfway through the meeting, my phone was in my case behind me. It just went. It just literally non-stop for about the last... I'm desperately trying to wind up the meeting because it was that way. You knew it was... By this point, you knew it was coming. And I'm sitting there going... And we walk out the door, and I've got a big grin on my face, and my colleague who knows nothing about football says, what's up with you? And what was going on with your phone? And before I'd even got to it, I said, Rangers have gone bust. So, Robert, can you remember where you were, how you heard about it? Because it would have been different time zone for you.
Yeah, 8 hours further on. I'm trying to think, what time did you get that information?
So that would have been mid-afternoon. That would have been around about 2-3 o'clock.
It was.
I seem to recall not knowing until the next morning, Hong Kong time. So I think I'd kind of missed the news late at night. And I think my first reaction to it was, okay, 10-point penalty, we're going to win the league. The league's all over. That was my first impression. Then I kind of had a look at what had happened, and so it was a creditors' voluntary administration scheme, which, so I suppose Duff and Phelps on paper were being tasked to, try and, restructure the debt, try and get HMRC to accept a small payout. And I think because the transfer window was over, they couldn't sell any players. Would that be right, Andrew? We were outside the transfer window.
Yeah. Yeah, they couldn't sell any players because they'd sold...
Jelic, she gets sold.
They were trying to push through
sold
that.
Him a couple of weeks before. They sold him a couple of weeks before, trying to stave it off.
Yeah, and then they were trying to push through the Daniel Kuzan coming in thing as well.
That's right.
The only club that ever went into administration and tried to increase their costs. That one.
I know. Duff and Phelps hadn't it? No, Duff and Phelps. That's just a company name. But David Whitehouse and Paul Clark. It was funny because we met them that weekend. But it was funny. Sorry, but I digress. But Stephen, sorry, you were thinking about going round. Sorry, this is the circular thing about where you were.
They couldn't raise assets. They couldn't raise substantial amounts of cash by, selling half the team. And, so if the administration had happened 6 weeks earlier, say beginning of January, would they have sold a bunch of players and then just played young boys just to keep the lights on by a bit of time? So it was a bit curious for me that they didn't do that. They would have got money from Davis and Naismith, McGregor, one or two others. They could have probably raised 20 million, possibly at a stretch. They didn't do that. And so they were kind of hamstrung straight away. There weren't assets to sell other than, you're not going to sell Murray Park or, a piece of real estate very, very quickly. These things take time. So there were, and I think there was also very little chance of HMRC agreeing to any reduced claim on their part, because from a tax point of view, Rangers was a test case for many, many other EBT schemes, which HMRC were trying to close down. One or two football clubs, a couple of the banks had used it. And so Rangers, in some respects, were a little bit unlucky to be the guinea pig in this, HMRC initiative. And, there was almost no chance of survival, frankly. And they'd only gotten to St. Valentine's Day by virtue of not paying any taxes for maybe 6 months. And even at that stage, and even with the Jelic money. So I think strategically the Rangers board probably handled it wrongly, and they should have realised that there was a solvency or an insolvency issue at a much earlier stage, and they might have been able to get some wiggle room if they'd used all of January as a fire sale.
And that was the thing, Saint. So that was the odd thing, that everybody knew it was coming, and and by this point, I think certainly through the January, people are saying, well, that the crux of it will be February, round about February, because the problem is clubs get their season book money in, they spend it, and then the point where they hit having absolutely nothing left, but they've still got wages to go. The bit they always have to bridge is in the January, February, March time before the new season books go on sale in April. So everybody knew it was around that time that the issue would be. And Robert, so the point you just touched on again, that really odd that they didn't. If they'd done it in January and had the fire sale. Any thoughts on that, Robert?
Kind of forget that they owed ticketed over 20 million as well. So the way they were operating with season ticket sales was, they were spending well in advance. They were the second largest creditor after the top. They would have had to agree to some, 10p in pounds type of deal. I don't know what it was at the end of the day.
That weekend, the weekend after Duff and Phelps were appointed, so we were called up to, it was a Saturday, there was a Saturday game, and were called up to the kind of blue room at Ibrox to meet them. And it was David Whitehouse and Paul Clark, and they looked like these kind of guys, you know, like their office would be behind some kind of like a bike shed down some alleyway, you know what I mean, just a plate on it kind of thing, you know. The certain, I mean, I'm not a great dresser, but you know, the kind of slightly tatty suits and kind of crumbs down kind of one lapel, you know, and like kind of tie not quite tied properly.
The cuffs are a bit frayed, and
the cuffs are a bit frayed, yeah. And it was like, but they were nice enough guys. But because I'd done a lot of stuff on Dundee, if you remember, Dundee got their CVA through because, what do you know? And I'd spoke to a lot of insolvency, people that had done insolvencies at football clubs. Never heard of these guys because none of the rest of them wanted to touch it, the experience. They didn't want to go near Rangers because it's so toxic. So they couldn't get people who knew the terrain when you have a club that goes into administration. You know, because Brian Jackson was he was the Red Adair of administrations. He would come in and firefight, and he got Dundee through it, he got Hearts through it, when it looked like both of those clubs were going to be liquidated. But they weren't. And somehow Dundee, it turned out that HMRC thought they were owed more than 25% of Dundee's debt. But when it came to it, it was 24.9% or something. So although they voted against the CVA, all the other creditors who just happened to make 75.1%, so they managed to get the CVA through. But when it came to Rangers, we all knew that but it was weird. Like Clark and Whitehouse, because that first day, I said to them, you can't get a CVA through. And they said, what? I said, no, HMRC, as a rule, vote down CVAs in football. If there's any tax avoidance, they vote them down. It's their policy. I'd spoken to HMRC, who'd said it was their policy, and you look through but so even though they were voting down, at other clubs like Dundee, they could vote down their CVA, but the CVA still get through. That could never happen at Rangers, and I always remember, and I love Roddy Forsyth, and Roddy says, I've spoke to HMRC, said, you know, they would be favourable to considering some kind of settlement. I said, that's just not true. That's just not true. But these two guys didn't have a clue, Clark and Whitehouse. They just did not have a clue. They just weren't. Football was completely alien to them. They tried to actually do things by the book. What they should have done was said, we need to liquidate this club right away. See if they'd have liquidated it and within a month and during the season. And they would say, you need to readmit us, this new Rangers or whatever the new co, you need to readmit us because otherwise your fixture list is completely destroyed. So you would have to have a completely void season. Because I thought if I'd have been advising them, I could have saved Rangers. Like, I didn't want to tell anybody, but you could have saved Rangers. You could have saved Rangers.
I remember reading at the time, and I'm bringing this up because you might be able to shed some light on it, that Craig White was in court looking for the administration, and there was two choices. He got to choose his administrators or the judge did. And the judge said, I'll leave it to Craig White to decide. And I remember whichever article it was, whichever journalist that was writing it, said, you've never seen relief in a man's face in your life that when he got to pick the administrators, who were the two guys you're talking about here. Right? So that always struck me as very funny. If you got the administration, why are you allowed to decide? Why are you allowed to choose your administrators? That didn't make any sense.
I suppose it happened in all the other clubs. I can remember it happened right going back to Airdrieonians, and if you remember their kind of liquidation process.
Does the court not normally appoint an administrator?
I don't think so. I think you can scan a bit.
Because your business is still trading. You're just in financial difficulty. You've not gone bust, so your business is still trading. So you're still in control of your business, and you're saying, "Look, we've got this problem. We're going to bring these guys in who will help me administer through." Because the whole concept of this is we're going to administration to see what we need to do to agree creditors taking a hit and everything that needs to happen, so that we can actually trade through this and come out the other side and continue trading. So from that perspective, you're in control of that. The administrators are supposed to, they're supposed to adhere to all the law and do things the right way, and so yes, you want guys that you're comfortable with using, but but in terms of why the court doesn't need to do it is because these guys are all then going to abide by the law and do things legally the right way, and they'll not keep a business trading and suddenly materialise an extra X percent of debt so that the people who'd vote against it would be at 24.9%. Is Andrew
Oh, by the way,
saying?
like, I'm not casting aspersions. I'm just saying that just happily worked out that way. Don't get me in trouble here, man.
Here's a wee trivia question. Which famous personality died in the same day that Rangers went into administration?
Oh, I seem to remember.
Because I looked it up.
Looked at it?
Yeah. Well, only because when I was looking at what happened and who died, so the name has already been mentioned at the beginning of the podcast as one of the people who passed away in this season.
It was Whitney Houston, and that's what sticks in my mind because I was in Dublin for a family get together. It was my in-law's wedding anniversary, and they'd been married in Dublin, and we went to a bar called Murray's Bar of all places in O'Connell Street, big huge bar. And it had these, you know how they've got the news screens on and they've got the ticker tape thing at the bottom coming up. And the next thing, Whitney Houston's dead. And everybody's like, oh, that's a shame. Young woman, you know, she was a great talent. And everybody's in a downer. And all of a sudden at the bottom of the ticker tape, Glasgow Rangers go into administration. And then it leaves and it goes on to something else. And I thought, did I read that right there? And I had to wait about 2 minutes till this thing come back on as it goes in the wee circle. And That's how I found out. But my overwhelming reaction at the time was one of shock because despite everybody knowing that what was going to happen, see when it actually happened, I was still quite shocked. I don't know if you guys feel the same.
That kind of happens to you, you know, even when a lot of the time in life when you're expecting something, you know something's happening, but when it does actually happen, you still can have that sense of shock.
Another thing as well is I thought that we're going to win this league now. Clearly we're going to win it. It's not even up for debate. And my mind went ahead of me in as much as we could win the Champions League next season, we'll get the Champions League money. They're clearly skint, whichever form they come back in, they're going to be skint for years. So it became obvious at that point that we were going to be in the ascendancy for years to come. Definitely.
But you know my memory of it, I actually asked in the desk, I said, look, see for the Sunday paper, can I write the anatomy of a fall? Because I knew people that had been witnesses at the first tier tribunal. So I thought I'll write through about the CBTs and how they're going to get hammered by da-da-da. And he said, oh no, you can do it. So one of the first witnesses I spoke to, he says, I've been at the first tier tribunal, he said, and the revenue are not making a great go of it. They're not making a great go of it. He said, I'm not convinced Rangers are losing this. He said, this is 50-50. And instead of, so what I wanted to write was all about how it got to this point that Rangers were really in the stum, you know, and instead I got a good news line. So I used it in the Sunday, right? And then Rangers tax case come out. It says, oh yeah. I see all the Rangers, like a good news Rangers story, a good news Rangers story. It's just the way that people's minds works. It's like, this was all came for me. I intended to write a different story. I got quite a kind of interesting tip, but I wasn't saying they were definitely going to get found in favour of in the first tier tribunal. But the Rangers tax case guy or woman or whoever it is accused me of all sorts of things. It's like, this is what happens in the Celtic sport. A section of them, it's become Trumpian in the sense that it doesn't matter what news is presented to them. They'll find an angle. They're trying to say that I'm trying to present a good news story for Rangers. I just found out inadvertently it was quite an interesting line, and I put it out. And I was getting he's accusing me of all sorts. So he's not, I always think, be careful with this kind of stuff. Because people are, the malice aforethought that you're accused of when you're just doing your job. And by the way, as it turned out, I was right. The first tier tribunal did find in favour of them. I wasn't right, the guy was right. But it was just a story. And when I was trying to write another story, it just come up. Anyway, sorry, because it always bugged me about the Rangers tax case saying, oh, I'm trying to write a good news story and a bad weekend for Rangers. No, you're just trying to do your job.
So now you've got that off your chest, Andrew.
Sorry. It's bugged me for 12 years.
So when all of this is going on, at that time of the season, sort of autumn and into the spring, the League Cup was taking place and it would complete in March. So we had the League Cup run. We'd beaten Ross County away, we'd beaten Hibs away 4-1. Semi-final, we'd beaten Kilmarnock 3-1. And then we've beaten Falkirk, I should say, 3-1. And we've got Kilmarnock in the final. So everything's all feeling good. We're on this winning run in the league. Rangers are dying. And we've got little Kilmarnock in the League Cup final. So it looks like the first trophies in the bag. And Robert, it doesn't happen. What went wrong with the League Cup final and the League Cup campaign?
I remember watching the game, and I think we hit the woodwork a couple of times, and we had chances, but they had chances as well. I remember they had the Northern Irish coach, Kenny Shields. I think his son was playing Dean Shields. So come on, got a good account for themselves, and we looked as if we could have played all day and scored. Although throughout the season we'd come up with a lot of late goals and late drama, but it was them that, I think the guy slung over a great cross, and was he a Dutch guy, a Belgian guy, and something, and Wellington or something like that. He stuck it away, and I seem to recall we had a good penalty shout right at the end of the game, which was a massive disappointment. And, Lennon had already, Lennon's early record at Hampden wasn't that great. Actually, he'd lost to Ross County in a Scottish Cup semi-final. We're going to talk about this season's Scottish Cup as well, another defeat at Hampden. So, Hampden then was very different prospect for Celtic compared to Hampden in the last few seasons for us. We almost unbeatable, except in extra time. So big disappointment, because it looked like the treble was there on a plate, and turned out to be far from that.
So, Stephen, what were your thoughts on it? Because this was part of that thing that started to take hold, that Lennon couldn't win at Hampden around this time with this result, and obviously we'll get on to the Scottish Cup. So what was your thoughts? Rangers had gone into administration by the time the final came around, so what was your thoughts on the final?
First thing that sticks in my mind is we played in the change strip. We didn't play in the hoops. We played in the sort of white jersey with green sleeves and green shorts, which I thought was kind of peculiar, because we don't normally. If Kilmarnock are playing in blue and white stripes, then it shouldn't be a clash of colours. But it's one of those games that, as the game wore on, I just remember thinking to myself, we're not going to score here. I just can't see a goal coming, because never at any point in the game did we play with any great cohesion, and did we play with any great flair. We didn't really create chances. And to be honest, as the game wore on, I thought Celtic looked nervous. And then I'm trying to think off the top of my head, I think it was maybe like 85 minutes that Kilmarnock scored, and then there was a cavalry charge in the last 5 minutes as we try and get, and one of the guys has already said there, I think Stokes went down in the area for a penalty, which was a decent call, but we didn't get that. But, if everything taken into consider, Kilmarnock were probably were the winners that day, because it wasn't one of those games where we pounded a team and they hit us in the break. I don't think we played very well. Another thing I would say is that in my lifetime, I can remember us losing League Cup finals to Partick Thistle, to Raith Rovers and to Kilmarnock. So I know Lennon's was having a bad time of it at Hampden, but Celtic traditionally being strong favourites in the League Cup final, Dundee in '73, for example. There are occasions where it doesn't work out well for us, and it was just one of those days.
Andrew, you'd been reporting on it, I assume?
I was reporting on it. My memory is I was the last guy to leave the huge big press area at Hampden. I was the last guy to leave because our paper wouldn't accept. We'd heard that Liam Kelly's dad had died. The Kilmarnock player's father had died at the game. and they wanted three sources. Where every other newspaper ran with it. Well, like, we'd spoke to people in the mix zone after, we'd spoke to the fellow players and all that, and it was so tragic. Like, they're just like ashen face, all their players. They just won the League Cup, beat Celtic in the League Cup final, but must have been a really weird occasion for them, a really strange occasion. But I had to wait to get the hospital weren't getting back to me and all that, because before my editor was willing to print the story, he wanted me to have three separate sources that Liam Kelly's father had died. So that was the strange memory I have of it. But also the memory of it is like, it was a certain penalty. I watched that recently. It was a definite, Celtic should definitely have had a penalty. It was definitely a penalty when, and it was Dieter van Turnhout, the guy that scored the goal.
Yeah.
It was a great, it was a great header, wasn't it? Like
great cross.
Great cross and great header. And Cammy Bell had that. Although I agree with you, Stephen, it wasn't a Celtic pounding a goal, but he had one of those days. He probably the day of his career, Cammy Bell, the Kilmarnock keeper.
Yeah.
But it was really weird to watch Celtic losing to a team outside of Rangers in a cup, because it kind of that disappeared in the modern era. It really didn't happen to Celtic and Rangers. The kind of in this millennium that they were losing finals to anybody but each other.
So
was it Stephen, that Celtic and Rangers had lost a first final in the millennium to a team outside of each other?
Well, that's interesting. If that's the case, yes.
I think you're probably right, and so we back to the league, because the thing about the League Cup final is we'd drawn with Aberdeen the game before the League Cup final, and then the game following the League Cup final was away to Rangers on the 25th of March at Ibrox, and obviously it was the first time we played them after their administration, so there was, despite the disappointment of the League Cup, there was great excitement about what was going to follow afterwards when we were going to go to Ibrox, and they were on a downer because of everything that was happening, and we were going to win. And
did we need a point to win the league that day?
I think if we'd won at Ibrox, we'd have won the league.
Won that day, yeah. That was a disappointment.
So yeah, Robert, we go to Ibrox and we lose. So, do you have memories of that?
Memories is watched it on the telly, so it must have been on Singapore telly. Just back there, I presume it was a lunchtime kick-off and a reasonable kick-off time for me in Asia. And I've never been so angry. You know, when we were 3 down, shouting, swearing, screaming at the telly, the kids are diving out the fight, you know, and my wife came and sat next to me, trying to calm me down. And then we scored 2 goals in the last couple of minutes to give me some ridiculous hope. I think Scott Brown scored a penalty, and Thomas Robinson scored. We had played pretty badly that day, and didn't deserve anything other than a defeat. I don't remember much about the game and about Rangers' goals. I remember the Northern Irish guy, the young guy.
Andy Little.
Andy Little, yeah, he scored. So, yeah, pretty angry. Was not expecting that.
Chadu Ree get sent off after about half an hour, didn't he?
Chadu Ree and Victor Wanyama. We went down to 9 men in that game.
Right.
Because I remember, the thing I remember about the game is can't remember who the referee was, but the general consensus was, because we couldn't be allowed to win the league, with Rangers going into administration, we couldn't be allowed to win the league at Ibrox. And so the refereeing performance for Chadu Ree off and Victor Wanyama off had all been about, and then giving Celtic an 89th minute penalty when Rangers were 3-0 up, so it didn't really matter. That was the sort of narrative that I remember coming out of the game.
That was a 21 game unbeaten run in the league, came to an end then. Just looking up.
The report on the referee was Callum Murray, and the score after 71 minutes was just 1-0. So, a lot of activity at the end. Sonny Aluko scored for Rangers that day, and the ultimate winner was Lee Wallace. don't remember the ball at all.
No, I can't say I do. One of the days, it happens after you've won, when the league's effectively won. It's like, how often did Celtic used to win the dead rubbers against Rangers when Rangers during 9 in a row era? How often, you're a cricketing man, how often did England would win the test against Australia once the Ashes was settled, eh?
Exactly. Yeah. When it's a dead. I mean, that's the thing. Well, the Hampden season for us when we beat Rangers comfortably.
Yeah.
The best,
in the last
example is 2 seasons ago, but when Rangers played Celtic at the end of the season, and my son was reaching that Rangers won 3-0. Now, Celtic played I think that was the day that we realised that Kobayashi wasn't going to be a player, but I think O was up front rather than Kyogo and that kind of thing. And my son was raging. I'm like, but why be upset about that game? It doesn't matter. A jot. Just let it go, because as we've already said there, that it happens so often to either team that whoever wins the league is in the ascendancy. When it comes to the last game, the opposition win it, but it matters not a great deal.
No.
My view on that you just referred to, Stephen, was based on the team selection. If Ange doesn't care, why should we be caring?
Why should we bother?
Yeah. But I suppose what we didn't at that time, it would be the last league meeting, or you could ever say, like, depends where you want to go here, the last league meeting ever between Celtic and Rangers, or the last league meeting in kind of 4 years, four and a bit years,
Well, there's one more to come, isn't there?
There's one more to come.
One more to come.
Was there one
after
more
the
to come?
split at Celtic Park?
Game to come. Yeah.
Because
Again.
yeah, so it was the last time we ever played.
How did that one go?
It was the last. Well, we won 3-0. It was the last time we played them at Ibrox. It was the last time we would ever play the old Rangers at Ibrox. That would that would be it.
The old Rangers.
So that delayed the title. We won the title. So this was the sort of the way things go around. We when the 3-3 game had been the pivotal moment where if the result had gone against Lennon, he thought he was going to lose his job. He actually secures the title with a 6-0 victory at Rugby Park. That's when it becomes mathematically certain that Celtic have won the league. It's a 6. So 3-3 saves his job. Charlie Mulgrew saves his job with the equaliser, and then we go back to Rugby Park, secure the league. Charlie Mulgrew starts the scoring in that game as well. So there's a real comes full circle. The circle of life in that season.
Yeah, they were fabulous as well. It was like, that's the way you want to win a league, as they did under Ange, kind of thing. As they did this season again at Kilmarnock, again at Rugby Park. They just turned it on. They just, putting on the style. It was one of those days. I remember being, God rest his soul, but with Kevin McCara, because he didn't often get the chance to cover Scottish games, so he was working for the Guardian then and all that. And they said to him, just as a wee sop, say, Kevin, go up and you can cover Celtic because it looks like you'll win the league. And he's just his wee face, that's my memory of it. Just it's a great memory, just his wee face about how chuffed to bits he was. Not just to see Celtic win the league, but win it like that. Win it with a 6-0. It was like, that's what Celtic, so often, Stephen will know better than me, but they so often are good at that. When it comes to it, when you want a moment, you want a memory, you want how when you seal a title and all that. And so often Celtic provide that. It's not just they get over the line. They get over the line with aplomb,
So Robert?
I think Charlie Mulgrew scores fabulous goal at Rugby Park, where I don't know whether he's playing left back or left midfield, but he gets the ball out on the left and then he cuts inside the defender and he swerves one into his right foot. I think Charlie Mulgrew was Player of the Year that year. I don't know whether it was the journalists' Player of the Year or the players' Player of the Year. He had a fantastic season.
He was definitely the journalist Player of the Year, I remember, because he gave a great acceptance speech. Because do you remember that Michelle Moan? Do you remember Michelle Moan had dobbed him into the police about his kid was in the car.
That's
and
right,
he was in the supermarket. So he stood up at his acceptance speech with the football writers' dinner, and he looked at his watch and says, I can't speak for long because the Wayne's in the motor. Like, that was his opening line. He's a funny guy, Charlie. He's a funny guy. He's a great guy. Like, but he was blinding. He was blinding that season. Like, he took on a new level because I was never very sure of him, but he really found something else that season. He did improve. He was a guy who just kept getting better the older he became.
I think as he got old, he was one of these people that as he got older, he understood his own limitations and also understood what managers needed from him. When
for a defender, he'd some left foot in him.
Oh yeah,
he's a really skillful player for a defender.
Yeah. He'd real genuine. Aye, the wand of a left foot, as they always say. Why is it always just the left foot? Is the wand? You know what I mean?
So that's us secured the title 6-0 Rugby Park. Only one more game of any import to go in the league campaign, and that is Rangers come, as we've just touched on, Rangers come to Celtic Park for the final ever Celtic Rangers game. The final ever Old Firm game is a way you could put it, actually. There's a way that straddles the fence for you, Andrew. It's the final Old Firm game was at Celtic Park 3-0. So, Stephen, do you remember much of that game?
I do, actually. That was a really enjoyable day. I mean, the one thing that sticks in my mind, and we all know what it is, was the banner, the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
Which really summed up the whole situation in terms of the Rangers support that day was just desperate. I mean, you never get a song out of them. They were totally subdued. Celtic played very well on the day, played really well, but what sticks in my mind is that the Celtic Park DJ at the end, and what was the song? It was the 3 Degrees.
When will I see you again?
When will we see you again?
Oh, yeah.
Right? And that was just so funny that everybody just burst out laughing when that was played, and they played it really loud.
Yeah.
When will we see you again? Because to be honest, we didn't know when we were going to see them again. As it turned out, it would be 4 years. Then when the next team Fibrox came to light. But very enjoyable day. Just summed up the season, and it just showed the gap between Celtic and Rangers at that time. We had so many players that were playing out their skin. Guys like Joe Ledley had come on to a really good game. Wanyama had cemented his place. Chris Commons was having a great time. Hooper and Stokes up front, fantastic. And you looked at the Rangers team, and somebody mentioned Aluko earlier. He was a very poor player, I thought. And the other guys as well, like Bartley and Goya, and big sort of Romanian guy. So they were scraping the barrel at that point.
Was that the day that the banner went all the way round the ground and even got passed along through the director's box, or was that a different day?
Well, I think it was a different day. That was a different day, because this was, as Stephen says, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I think that's possibly the Green Brigade's best. I don't think they've surpassed that. It was phenomenal. It was phenomenal.
Who were the four?
It was the tax
one.
man. Hector was one.
Lennon was two.
White was one, wasn't he?
Craig White.
Craig White.
Craig White.
Yeah.
So who was the fourth one then?
Oh, bloody hell.
I'm just pulling it up to have a look at it right now.
Was it Murray? Must have been Murray, no?
It was... No, one was just death.
One was just death.
One was White, one was Hector, one was Lennon, and one was just the Grim Reaper.
The Grim Reaper.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it could have been Murray, since he was one of the...
Murray.
I mean, it should have been Murray.
I don't know how many articles I wrote about that, but try to blame the wrong guy.
Yeah, he was the real reason they went bust was David Murray.
Yeah.
Should have been stripped of his knighthood. He was what, 10%? 10% of the entire debt of the Bank of Scotland that went bust was David Murray. And then they swapped, because you said earlier 300 million quid, it was close to £1 billion. And they swapped debt for equity in all these businesses, which was basically just writing off the debt until they got to about 300 million, and then they pulled the plug. So they were pulling the plug at 300 million, and it didn't sound quite as bad as pulling the plug at close to £1 billion. It was 900 and something million pounds.
Yeah, that was his Debt Mountain. Debt Mountain, and that was the phrase I used to use. Yeah.
Yeah, so, Robert, your memories of that 3-0 victory and end of that season?
Well, I remember instead Charlie Mulgrew brilliant header for the first goal. Actually, all the goals were tremendous that day, because the second one was Chris Commons made a run from the halfway line. Somebody squared it to him, and the keeper's coming out, and he just dinks it over. Beautiful finish. And the third one, Hooper. I thought Gary Hooper was a tremendous striker, and he
was. I don't think he's recognised as he should be. He really was like a top-notch striker.
Last game of the season against Hearts, Hooper scores 5. And I think he was a brilliant striker. I was really sorry that he left. I thought probably could have done better than I think. But, he was very consistent for us. I think he did 3 or 4 seasons maybe with us, and he was very consistent. 20 goals a season, every season. But we finished a good win over Hearts. And that was the end of the season, because there was no Scottish Cup final to look forward to.
Yeah, so that was it. As you say, we finished the season with 5-0 over Hearts when it was 5 Gary Hooper goals over Hearts. It was a tremendous way to final day of the season. And the only competition not mentioned is obviously the Scottish Cup, which normally finishes at the end of the league season. We beat Peterhead away 3-0. And another trip up north, we beat Inverness 2-0. We were away to Dundee United and beat them 4-0. That again then starts the conspiracy theories about we're always getting drawn away from home in cup games. And then again, continuing building the momentum of the idea that Lennon can't win at Hampden principle, we lose 2-1 to Hearts. Last minute, Craig Beattie. It was one of these really dubious handball. From memory, was it handball against Joe Ledley, where the ball was basically battered against his hand from like 2 feet away or something like that, and Beattie scores the penalty. That's my sort of recollection of it. Saint Stephen, you remember anything about it?
Just remember Beattie's celebration, to be honest, which was quite over the top. I mean, obviously he's delighted to score, and I can accept it. He's delighted to score against his old club, to put one over on them, but running behind the trackside, and it just a wee bit overkill in that respect.
He ripped his shirt off, and instead of having a 6-pack, it's this kind of like a typical West of Scotland kind of, what I mean? Kind of generous girth there, like and he really had one of those kind of, it was like a medallion man's kind of hairy chest. Remember, it was like it's one of my younger family or whatever. I decided to go as a punter that day because again it was a Sunday, so I'd been to the I think I'd been to the Hibs one the day before, and we were right beside the Hearts fans, and they were so full. It was such a full afternoon in all sorts of ways. Such a full crowd. We had to walk through them and all that. That's my memory of that. Just how kind of.
Were they in financial difficulty at that time? Had they come out of it? I can't quite remember the time of their issues.
I think theirs came a wee bit later. I think it was 2014 that they ran into issues.
But Robert, you got any memories of that? I mean, obviously Hearts then went on to thump Hibs in the final.
Yeah. I just remember that I don't remember that much about the game. I remember our equaliser by Hooper was pretty late on, so leaping about, celebrating, thinking, okay, this is going to go extra time.
Yeah.
And, I think we'd played okay that day, and, we just missed a lot of chances. Hearts were decent. They had the other goal scorer for them that day was Rudy Scatchell, who was a good player.
He was a good player,
yeah.
They had the Zalukas or something, the big Lithuanian guy at the
Oh yeah, he was a
He
decent
passed
player as
away.
well.
He passed
He did
away
pass away,
very
didn't
young,
he?
didn't he?
He did.
Sad.
Because that was still around the time where Hearts just fading away from having the money about the club at that time, and then obviously the financial difficulties were about to
Still with the
go.
contracts that he kind of yeah. But it was the legacy of Vladimir Romanov.
Yeah, that's right. So we finished the season. We finished the season with just the league. We didn't win any of the cups. Football in general. Chelsea beat Bayern in Munich to win the Champions League. I think, was that not the famous John Terry puts the strip on at the end of the game? And Atletico Madrid beat Atletico Bilbao 3-0 in Romania for the Europa League. I was just looking at who played the most games. Fraser Foster played 47, Adam Matthews 37. Izagiri did manage to make 14 appearances, Mastorovic 25, Kelvin Wilson 22, Scott Brown 32, Samaras 38, Stokes 47, Chaddery 23, Joe Ledley 46, Chris Commons 33, Kyle 28, Thomas Ronja that we mentioned 17, Gary Hooper had the most appearances with 50 appearances, Victor Wanyama 42, James Forrest 43. You can see from that Charlie Mulgrew 44. There was a core group of players who played virtually all the games. That's what you're seeing from that.
I think, Harry, interestingly, Chris Commons only scored one goal that season. It was the goal against Rangers at Parkhead. So I'm trying to remember why he was, he was
Chris
usually...
Commons, Chris Commons got a bad injury, Robert. I think it was at Hearts at Tynecastle when we lost 2-0. And he get carried off that day. I've got a vague recollection. Yeah.
He got sent off in that game back in October. I think Harry said he played 33 games, but just one.
I'm just trying
That's
to...
unusual.
33 games.
That's unusual.
But yeah, one goal. So yeah,
Cooper just fell short of the 30 goals as well. 29 goals he scored that season.
Yeah, that's right. So, and obviously, as we're coming to the end of the season, then, and we'll probably talk about this more in the next episode, because it was the next episode was whether there was going to be a Rangers at all at the start of the next season and how they were going to be dealt with. But as we were coming to the end of that April period of time, that's when there was then lots of talk about Rangers and up for sale. I mean, I can remember a guy coming into my office, property guy, with paperwork that thick, puts it down on my desk and says, that's all the property that Rangers own. And it was basically, he was interested in doing a property deal on Rangers. And I had the good fortune, I was dealing with two people who were offering to buy Rangers at double the price that they ended up selling for. Both of them.
Was that £4 then? Because I think Charles Green gave Craig White £2, didn't he? So it was your pal offering to buy it for £4.
Well, this was off the administrators that ended up. Charles Green paid £5 million, and the two people I knew were both in deals that were £10 million. One of them, I think we're far enough away now that I can talk about this. So one of them was, what he was looking to do was Western Scotland Rugby Club. He could get housing on there. I think. Oh no, he could get housing on Rangers training ground at Auchin. Whatever it was, he was trying to do. I'm trying to remember what it was, but he was trying to do a land swap with Western Scotland Rugby Club and Rangers training ground. That's what it was. He could get planning on Rangers ground on Western Scotland Rugby Club, so what he was trying to do was buy Rangers. He would then do a swap where Western Scotland Rugby Club would play at Rangers training ground, and he would then build housing. So basically the deal was the numbers were roughly this: buy Rangers for £9 million, that's what it was. Buy Rangers for £9 million. He wasn't a Rangers fan, this guy. Buy Rangers for £9 million. And the deal, he had an agreement in principle with Stuart Milne and a couple of others, I think Taylor Wimpey, to buy the land, the agreement in principle to buy the land at Western Scotland Rugby Club, and they would put housing on it, and they would buy it off him for £11 million. So his proposal was buy Rangers for 9, do the land swap. Western Scotland Rugby Club would play at Auchenhowie, or whatever its name was at the time. he would then sell Western Scotland Rugby Club to to Stuart Milne and Taylor Wimpey and a consortium of builders for 11 million quid. And by this point, Rangers fans might have started to work out that he wasn't a Rangers fan, and might even have found the backdated history of his only involvement of liking any football in any media was Celtic. So he was a bit worried at how quickly he would find out. So he needed to do the deal really quickly. And then what he would do, he would hand Rangers over to the Rangers Supporters Trust for free. And he would walk away with 2 million quid from the deal. That was his deal.
Right.
And didn't happen. And then the other one was a consortium, and it was a consortium headed up by a guy called Frank Blinn.
Frank.
Yeah, you'll know Frank, Robert. So the consortium was Frank Blinn, and there was a whole load of issues about. They were looking at the possibility of, because they were having such a struggle with the deal, they were looking at the possibility of Rangers playing at Hampden and leaving the administrators with Ibrox to chip down the price of Ibrox, because Ibrox then has no value if there's no Rangers playing at it, because the housing, the value of the housing you could put on Ibrox was pretty low, in Ibrox Govan area, not demeaning it, just the practicalities of it, and then the cost of demolishing Ibrox to put the housing on it, it wasn't a proposition. And okay, maybe you can put some supermarkets or stuff like that on it, but there was already an Asda, big Asda just down the road, and there was a retail thing there, so there's no massive value on that. And their idea was that they were going to go and play at Hampden for a period of time, and they had Richard Gough as part of their group. And I remember I was sitting, I couldn't remember the name of the restaurant, but I could drive you to the restaurant in Edinburgh where I was sitting having lunch with Frank Blinn. And his phone starts going, and he looks at it, and then he turns to me and he says, "I need to go." "What is it?" "We're being shafted over the Rangers deal." And he got up and left. And then Charles Green, and his deal was 10 million quid as well. And Charles Green picked it up for 5.
Frank Blinn was 1 hour away from becoming the administrator of Celtic in 1994. He was the Bank of Scotland's guy. He was not Celtic on the edge of verge of greatness. So, there was also a bid for Singapore, Rangers, were the guys that were Chinese money, but printed up by a couple of expatriate Rangers fans in Asia, and they were looking at 15. They walked away because they could not get access to all the documents they requested for different films. And I think the same thing happened with Miller, the American.
Oh, yeah, Bill Miller and his incubator proposal. The history,
but the thing
and
is,
all that.
see his incubator proposal, it's effectively what ended up happening with Rangers, which is, I'm going to create this other entity, and then we'll just transfer all the trophies and the history will go into this other entity. And at the time it was scoffed at as that's ludicrous, and the Rangers fans chased him away because the whole concept was they wanted continuity. And they've ended up accepting the principle of what his deal was.
Yeah, I suppose so. I suppose because that's what happens at football clubs. It's like, as I say, I don't like Rangers exceptionalism, and I think we all agree with no exceptionalism for Rangers. So Rangers don't treat Rangers differently. So I treat Rangers the same way I treat Luton Town, the same way I treat Coventry City, the same way I treat Middlesbrough, who are all been liquidated. You look at Middlesbrough's website, in the history of the club, there's a paragraph in it that says Middlesbrough were liquidated, but the club was saved. That's how it goes. That's how it runs. I phoned up Luton Town when all this was happening with Rangers. I said, "Do you get any pictures up of David Pleat running around the stadium and all that? Because you're a different club." And the guy said, "What are you talking about?" Because they were liquidated in the year 2000. A year after Rangers were liquidated, Coventry City were liquidated. They just carried on. 10 points and you carry on. Because that's why people talk about Doncaster trying to go easy on Rangers. He came from an English perspective, and they're no squeamish about it. They just see it as a brand. And as long as somebody wants to carry on the brand. I mean, if you remember when they got when the CVA was turned down, HMRC released a statement and said, "Our decision today does not preclude Rangers continuing as a going concern." That was their line in their statement.
the interesting thing for me was the fact that, Charles Green paid Duff Phelps £5.5 million to buy the assets of Rangers. And within 6 months, they'd done a listing on the stock exchange and raised 20 million or something, low 20 millions for the same assets.
I know. I never understand that kind of thing.
But the only conclusion that you can draw from that is that Duff and Phelps did a very good job in trying to, get the best deal possible for the creditors.
Yeah, surely they could have done better than Charles Green.
Yeah,
he was like that professional northerner in the Harry Enfield show. I like what I say and I say what I like. That's it. See the way he went on? It was crazy. I'm like Nanny McPhee. When you don't like me but you need me, I'll be here. But when you like me but you don't need me, I'm gone. That's what he told us one time and all this, And I said, Celtic, how can you ever... Celtic have just made 17 million. 17 million is nothing. It's nothing. I'll make double that. I said, all right, but nobody's ever made double that in Scottish football. Well...
The other thing about Charles Green that sticks in my mind is that somebody, my acquaintance, said that he only ever had the one suit. He was clearly a guy of limited means. Every time he turned up at a meeting, he had the same suit on.
He probably borrowed it off of Duff and Phelps, you know what I mean? Just cleared some of the crumbs away.
Yeah, and then I then started to be doing more stuff down in London and came, interacting with people who knew people like Imran Ahmed and stuff like that, and yeah.
He is a kind of Trump type character. This just complete bullshit. You just say it often enough that you think people will believe it. Just bulldoze your way with kind of brainless words. That's what we're seeing. With Trump as well, just utter bullshitters. Grifters. We see it. The grifters have taken over.
I think it was just after the season finished that the whole thing about was it in the May, just after the season finished, that famous creditors meeting that lasted 1 minute or whatever it was that in the May 2012 when it was all finalised? That
June. I think it was June, wasn't it? June.
Yeah, that was when the CVA got rejected by HMRC.
Yeah,
140-year history over in 1 minute or something like the Daily Record had or something.
Yeah,
so the HMRC have more than 50% of the debt was owed to them, so they have the ability to...
£134 million was the total amount of Rangers debt at the end point. So, but anyway, that's us. We will. That's the first season of the 10 in a row, of the 9 in a row. We'll get to why the 10 didn't happen when we get to it. It's the first season of the 9 in a row. And the next episode, we will no doubt start with a debate about whether there is a Rangers and where that Rangers play, and the fact that there was two Rangers existed at the same time for a brief window as they went and played Brecon, and then what we did, more importantly, as a club going forward for the next 8 seasons. So with that, I will say, Andrew, Robert, Stephen, thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Nice to see you. Right, bye.
Bring me sunshine in your smile.
Thank you for listening to this podcast from Celtic Underground, the world's longest running football fans podcast. That was episode 1 of the second 9 in a row Chronicles. Now, if you are not currently a subscriber to the celticunderground.substack.com, and for goodness sake, why not? And you're missing out on Celtic Da, you're missing out on loads of stuff with Andrew H. Smith, his In Conversation podcasts, you're listening out on just loads of brilliant content. Anyway, if you go to thecelticunderground.substack.com/5016E026, I know, catchy title. That's thecelticunderground.substack.com/5061E026. If you are not a subscriber, you can subscribe for 30 days for free, so you can get the first 4 seasons of the 9-Year-Old Chronicles along with everything else to decide whether it's brilliant value for money to then get the full subscription. Anyway, enough of me. That was me, Harry Beatty, with all the guys, and we'll be back next Sunday as well, every Sunday, with the 9-Year-Old Chronicles.
And it is. Let your arms be as warm as the sun from up above. Bring me fun, bring me sunshine, bring me love, sweet love. Bring me fun, bring me sunshine, bring